Slater Crusaders, welcome to the show. Coming up later, we're going to talk with Richard Brookhiser, one of our finest historians, talk about America's founding, actually before our founding, like 1600s founding. And we're going to wrap up the show with a fantastic story of redemption and forgiveness. I will always share stories of redemption and forgiveness. We've got a good one for you coming up. But I want to start off here with a quick note about Iran. We've got more protests coming up in Iran. It's a beautiful thing to see. I'm inspired by their courage. It's fantastic. I want to quote here Yashar Ali. He writes for the Huffington Post. He said, I woke up this morning with dozens of messages from family and friends in Iran. Right now, Iran's a tinderbox. And as some of you know, there's protests mostly around the anger that Iranians feel towards the government after they admitted that the IRGC shot down the Ukraine Airlines aircraft. He goes on, he says, Iranians who are protesting and all the family and friends I spoke to who live in different parts of Iran are furious that they were lied to for 3 days about the cause of the plane crash. We'll get to that in a minute here. The Iranian government lied left and right about where the plane was headed and what brought down the plane. The Iranian government completely mishandled the plane crash, destroying evidence in the process. And Iranians are in the streets calling for the death to the supreme leader, something that could get them executed. Iranians are in the street calling for prosecution, saying Soleimani is a murderer, telling leadership of the Iranian government to resign and saying that Trump isn't the problem, the Iranian government is. To say that these protesters are brave is an understatement. And you know why. We've told the story before about how just a couple weeks ago, the Iranian government killed 1,500 Iranian protesters against the regime. Amazing. They're chanting death to the supreme leader. There's a Babylon Bee, they're like the Onion, right? They're hilarious. Babylon Bee headline that a CNN reporter had to go to Iran and tell the protesters, you should be shouting death to America. You're getting it wrong. You're saying death to the supreme leader. I think what you mean is death to America, because that's all we've heard for the longest time, but that's not the truth. That's not how the people feel. We had a guest yesterday who was born in Iran, and she talked about how young Iran is. So it turns out 60% of the country is under the age of 30. 60% of Iran is under the age of 30. Now, what's interesting about that is there was this big baby boom in Iran starting around 1980. The Islamic government, after overthrowing the Shah in 79, made national growth a major tenet of their regime. And they came up with these incentives to have more kids, right? Everything was rationed out. So each child you have, you get more stuff, you get more ration points for TVs or food and cars, stuff like that, because it was all distributed on a per capita basis. So that was 1980. In 1989, they had the war with Iraq, and there was this belief that all the economic problems in Iran were caused by too many kids. So they stopped all the incentives. The government handed out free contraceptives to everyone. They stopped all maternity leave policies. They wanted to disincentivize having kids. And then in 2006, the Iranian government tried to bring the birth rate back up again. There's a quote from the president at the time, Ahmadinejad, saying that 2 kids isn't enough. You need to have more. Right? Here's what's interesting about this. The reason the Islamic leaders started incentivizing having kids back in 1980 was they thought that more people would mean more soldiers to protect the regime. But it turns out having all these kids did create a massive baby boom, but it created a massive baby boom of young people who hate the regime. Right? You have these young people chanting death to, not America, but death to the supreme leader. That's not what the supreme leader had in mind when they came up with this policy a couple decades ago. The baby boom was intended to strengthen the regime. And instead, it's going to be the downfall of it. And the downfall has to come from within. Has to come from within. This is a clip of the guest that we talked to yesterday. I took no joy in her tripping up over this first word here after I embarrassingly could not pronounce her first name properly. But here she is yesterday talking about what the steps they're taking to prevent a power vacuum from existing in Iran once the internal collapse is complete. Here she is.
It's analogous, I don't know if I'm saying that word,
That's right.
to the U.S. Constitution. The first and most important article of this Constitution is freedom of religion, which is the most important pillar of a democratic society, of a republic. Iran has 33 provinces, and Each province would have its own, just like we have a federal government here. Each state has its own sovereignty. It's very similar to the U.S. Constitution.